Welcome to the New Discovery Christian Podcast, where you'll find Bible messaging and sermons that will encourage, uplift, and challenge you to a godlier life. Join our community and become inspired to continue living a God-directed life.
Welcome again to the New Discovery Podcast with your hosts here, Kyle and Zach with me for another episode. So we're going to tune in like we did last time. You saw me and Zach, and we're going to go through some scriptures today. We're going to go through, me and Zach had a discussion about how we can, well, maybe we'll get there. But we got a couple scriptures that are going to go into what does the Bible have to talk about people who are foreigners, and specifically these scriptures are going to talk about the most vulnerable among us, and we're going to kind of take one of those out, and we're going to talk about something that's relevant right now with kind of the political, cultural climate here in the United States. So we're going to read a couple stories to you, and we're going to read from the prophets a little bit, and then me and Zach, we're just going to dive in from there and kind of just talk about what's going on, and Scripture is our principle.
And these scriptures are going to show us how Christians are actually supposed to act, and when they face these things. Either, you'll see posts on social media about the subject we're going to touch on. You'll see it on the news a lot nowadays, and I just feel like some Christians are becoming polarized between one side or the other. But we're going to take a look at what God's word says, what the truth says about how we need to treat people who don't necessarily speak like us, look like us, come from different cultures. And I'll let Kyle jump in. I'll read a little bit, and then we'll go back and forth.
Yep, here we go. So I'm going to read from Genesis 18, and it's going to be the story of Abraham when the three visitors is what it's called, the story. So Genesis 18:1. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought. Then may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered. "Do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent of Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 shahs of finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant, who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set them before them. While they ate, he stood near them under the tree.
There's a lot right there, a lot. And then I'm going to be reading from Genesis 19, and I'm going to start at verse 1 and read through verse 9. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. There's something common right there with him and Abraham. "My lords," he said, "please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning." "No," they answered, "we will spend the night in the square." But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." Get out of our way," they replied. "This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. And then I'm going to jump to Jeremiah. We're going to go to the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 22, and just verse 3. And this is what the Lord says: Do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor the one who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place.
And I'm going to read from Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah, and it's in chapter 7, 8. And it says, "This is what Yahweh Almighty said: Administer true justice, show mercy, and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other." There was one thing that I thought was kind of interesting, and why I included the prophets was in the prophets. It was the one I read from in Zechariah. It reminded me of when it talked about administering justice and not oppressing and it talks about the widows and the poor and also the foreigners. One thing I was kind of interesting, before we kind of zero in like we are here in a minute on the specific topic we want to get going on, but the word administer and oppress, I usually think of with people who are in charge. And I thought it was kind of interesting how that alludes to Genesis on how we're supposed to be the rulers and caretakers of the world, and God, we're supposed to represent God in that fashion. And it's just, I don't know, it kind of reminded me of our job, and our duty is to those who are weakest among us. And it's kind of reminding us of that we're supposed to be looking out for them, and we're supposed to be administering that justice with our rule that we have and the power or strength that we have, not using it for oppression for the weakest among us. And I just thought that was an interesting note, and just a reminder of who we are and what we're supposed to be doing. But I wanted to see if you wanted, I don't know if you wanted to jump in specifically what we just talked about.
I've got a lot to jump in.
Yeah.
I could sit here for a long time, and this was a subject that was sort of on my heart a few months ago, just on social media, getting on social media, and I don't like to spend a whole lot of time on there because of some of the things that I see, and it takes everything in me to hold back from posting. But I think if people took a stance of not just being on one side or the other, one side, we're talking about immigration or illegal immigration, and people coming over this country illegally and seeing families torn apart. What if we just didn't have two sides? What if it just wasn't, you're separating the families and you're tearing them apart, and look what you're doing. And then there's the other side, they're breaking the law. What if there's that middle ground, like, hey, they're breaking the law, but we need to have compassion for these people at the same time? Why can't there be like a resolution somewhere in between, not one drastic to the other drastic, And I think if people have more compassion in their hearts for people and loved people more and cared about people more, and still kept God's a God of law and a God of justice, still kept that in mind. Punishment's needed sometimes. And still punished, but why do people get so fired up and angry and just feel so proud of themselves whenever they tear down another culture being kicked out? And it's almost it's people not showing love, and I think a lot of Christians, it's hard not to with the climate, political climate nowadays. But you saw, what'd you see? You saw Abraham. And then you saw Lot. What did they do? They bowed to the ground when foreigners came. Not in reverence, but in respect, I believe. In respect, saying, "Hey, you're welcome here. No one's going to hurt you. We'll provide for you." Whether illegally, if they come illegally, they're breaking the law. Countries have laws, and they will need to be punished. But we also, on the same token, we should have in mind that they are fleeing. One, they're trying to come to our country. There's a reason they're coming to our country. It's not just, let's just go travel and we'll go somewhere. There's a reason they're coming. And a lot of times it's because they can't provide for their family in a way that they need to over there. If I saw on TV how we were living over here, I would come, and sometimes they have to come illegally. Let them face the punishment, but there has to be some middle ground, and I think it has a lot to do with people's hearts and looking at the situation and just wanting to be on one side or the other. When I feel like if we took a biblical approach to that, we might not be on the far right or the far left. we might be, towards the middle on a subject like that in terms of caring for people. And
Yeah.
in caring for people doesn't mean you're, a liberal, or it doesn't mean you're a Republican, conservative. Caring for people is being a Christian. I think if more people were Christian instead of liberal or Republican, I don't think we'd have as many problems as we got going on with this subject right here.
I've noticed one thing, and when people ask me about, especially about politics or something like that, I tend to tell them, like for instance, I was very uncomfortable with this topic in school. It was about the LGBT community, and I had to sit back and kind of look through a lot of LGBT people talking. They weren't actually there, but it was a documentary on it and their perspective and their stories and things like that. And we discussed it after class, and I was a bit uncomfortable listening to something that I didn't necessarily agree with all the ideas, but I ended up telling the class afterward. I kind of sat through it, and it wasn't just like, I'm not going to listen to any of this and just kind of reject it. I told them that the way that I try, and what I think is a biblical principle is I try to treat ideas with truth, and then treat people with compassion, though, because I think we got to be really careful that when we have an idea, we start to make people ideas, and then we like to destroy ideas. But the problem is you're destroying a person, and there's a difference between
Person who has value.
Right, who has value, and we believe everyone's been created in the image of God. And they deserve a level of respect for being valuable as the pinnacle of creation, and they deserve that bit of respect. Not respect as in like a president kind of respect, but a respect as a person. And so if you treat ideas with truth, you can pick them apart. You can use logic. You can use tools of such as like scientific study or things like that to help understand certain situations and different angles of a particular idea, whatever that is, and that may be a political idea. And I think we would all agree that it would be dumb if we didn't do that with ideas, because then anything goes, but that's a whole
Then
nother
there is
thing.
no truth in any ideas. Like,
Right.
There's no common good.
And as Christians, we believe Jesus is the truth, and there is truth in this world. But people, Jesus is always talk about with the crowds, treating them with compassion to the crowds. And he even later says and knows that most of them just came for bread. He could have been, he could have always just been like snarky and sarcastic with them, and, hey, I just know you're here for the bread, and just said little things like that, and just been snippy and just shoot them off. And I mean, that's what the disciples were doing, trying to shoot them off without eating. He could have been like, yeah, they're only here for that bread. Just go on, go home. He could have been like that, but he didn't. He wasn't like that, though. Even though he didn't agree with their ideas of why they were there. And he clearly tells them that at one point, but he's shown so much compassion to them already. And I think that's the issue that we have right now. I think it's very easy temptation to make people ideas, and you want to knock down and destroy the ideas, but you knock down and destroy people with real emotions and lives that are attached to it. And we're specifically talking about a lot of people from Central and South America coming up to the United States. That's our perspective that we're giving with this. It's not somewhere else in another, across the world or anything. Europe has something similar, but this cuts close to home for us. And I know, getting to know people who've been down there and whether they were illegal or not illegal, I noticed there was a face behind the person. And when you talk with them, whether or not they're illegal or not, you start to, it's like your heart starts to open up when there's real experiences, stories, and a face behind this, and families behind this, and lives attached to it,
If people met and became friends with more people who didn't think and look like them, I wonder what the world would be like. Because I know in heaven it's going to be like that. Everyone's going to be, worshiping the Lamb of Glory. All different tribes, tongues, and nations
Yep.
are all going to be up there. And I just think if more people went out of the way to learn about different cultures, respect them, and just have compassion for the actual person, have compassion for the person who was made in the image of God, you wouldn't have all those issues. And I wanted to bring up, how Jesus looked at foreigners. Even ones that were even people. How he looked at foreigners, but also people who were breaking the law at times. I think. Who was the tax? Zacchaeus?
Zacchaeus?
Yeah, who was the tax collector, but he was robbing people of their money.
Yep.
Forgave him. He became a follower of Jesus. Mary Magdalene was essentially a whore, and she was sleeping around, and that was against the law. At least it's against God's law.
Yeah.
And I think it was against Jewish law too, which makes sense. God's law, Jewish law.
Yeah.
And so she was breaking the law. What did he do? Forgave her. She became a follower. And then, how he treated people in Samaria where all the other apostles wanted to walk around. He cared about the souls of the Samaritans, and he went out of his way to witness and to talk to a lady at the well.
Enemies of the Jews, too.
Yeah. And
Samaritans did some nasty stuff to the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Some people don't know they took bones and threw them in the temple and disrespectful things like that. They're not just some.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it wasn't just.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they weren't just some people where it's like, oh, we just want to be angry.
So there was there was a real rivalry there.
Yeah, there was a rivalry. But I wanted to tack that on to what you were saying.
Yeah, Jesus was saying, I don't care about this rivalry. I'm here to win souls and get you to heaven. Yeah. And if we had that perspective, then now I do think in terms of immigration. I think people who, and this is just my personal opinion, I think people who come over here illegally should be given an opportunity. If they've been working here, they haven't committed any crimes, broken any laws, except they haven't been paying taxes. I think they should be given an opportunity to work here, to stay here, to work here. If they have a skill that they can bring to our society and in our economy, I think they should be given the opportunity. They made a mistake. There should be some sort of punishment, some sort of financial punishment, like a certain amount of their checks they have to pay this much. There's people smarter than me that can come up with something.
Right.
And I think people who come over here illegally who have committed crimes or in another country or have committed crimes since their short time here, they need to go. They forfeited their right. They need to go. But anyone who's been working here just under the radar illegally, I think should be given an opportunity. I might catch some flack for that, but I just think if they're punished, there needs to be a punishment for coming here illegally, because then people will just keep on coming.
Yeah.
But I think they should be given an opportunity. If they have a valuable trade that they can bring, if they can work, then as long as they're paying taxes, then I don't have a problem with giving someone a second chance. I mean, it's not like if they haven't murdered anyone.
Yeah.
So that's kind of sort of where I stand on the illegal immigration thing. And this topic, I think you could go towards these two sides. Politically, I think it could go towards a lot of different subjects too, if more compassion was involved in the whole political process.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like the two-party system anyway. I think it polarizes and makes you one drastic side, and then you've got this other drastic side, and it's two drastic sides battling each other. What do you think?
Well, me and Javen talked about what you just talked about. I think the major issue isn't really the two-party system. I think the issue is that no one wants to listen to someone else that talks something different than them. Both sides have a point with everything they say, but the problem is that both of them are so polarized because they just want to entrench themselves and not listen to someone else. And so what happens is they have an idea, and then they're just going to these extremes and doubling down because you can't listen to the other person because you become an enemy or you become a traitor. And I think that's...
You agree a little bit with the enemy. Oh, he's soft on this.
Right, right. And I think that's the issue. And just in almost every issue that we almost have, just about. I mean, I think politically there's a dot of there's some issues. Like there's some conservatives who probably don't like what we're saying right now. But that doesn't mean that we don't agree with some things that conservatives have to say necessarily. But that's the deal, is that maybe by saying this we're sellouts or something, or someone's like, yeah, they're a bunch of liberals or something. It's like, but you need to get to know me.
I'm not a liberal. I'll tell you that right now.
Right, but we're saying something that would not be within maybe the
if you said what we're saying orthodoxy. In a presidential debate, it would be looked at as soft on immigration. That's right. What it would be looked at. When really, it's I think it's being a compassionate conservative. Whether it's soft or not, I just think in my heart it's right. Looking at compassion for people, What? Since when is a second chance? For someone who came over here illegally, you have to separate him and his family and kick him out. How about giving him a chance to earn his citizenship? All he's done has been working here. You can get references if he has to get references from who he's been working with. I guarantee he's been working with coworkers, has a boss. He's not over here just not working. I guarantee most of the people who come over here are coming here for money. They're coming here to live a better life and coming here for money. The majority of people. And I've just never heard of nobody not getting a second chance. Have you? Now, you murder someone, okay. There's certain capital punishments that cannot. You take another person's life. I mean, I'm sorry, you're done. But,
Right. Yeah.
I just think something like that, where you're not hurting anybody else. You're not You're not physically harming anybody else. You're just essentially stealing. That's really what you're doing. You're stealing from the American people. You're stealing from the American economy.
Yeah.
What do you think about my stance on that?
I've tried to. This is a topic where sometimes I know that I haven't been thoughtful about it. How do I say this? I've been thoughtful about it, but sometimes I know on certain things I haven't been thoughtful enough to be extremely confident with what I say. Does that make sense? Now I have things that that I've thought through, but sometimes I don't have like a bow on the top. It's like I'm still kind of in the process. So everything I'm kind of talking about is I'm in the process of really just trying to think through this sometimes. And everything that I kind of talk about is my process in this. And I know one of the things that have helped me, especially with a lot of the policies that you're talking about, because one thing that I can say is that some people will say no borders. Now, the borders are what makes you different from someone else on the other side.
Makes you a country.
That's not a bad thing. And someone would say, well, I don't know about that. I would say, well, you have a house in a neighborhood that differentiates your family from the other house. That's not a bad thing. That's what you do to make the difference between you and the other person. And just countries do that on a much larger scale. So I don't have an issue with borders because I don't have an issue with you having a border with your neighbor. Does that mean you're mean to your neighbor? No. I mean, you wouldn't say things like, well, how come you don't allow access to your refrigerator to them? No one says that and makes that a compassion issue. So that's where I stand. I feel very confident in at least saying that we do need to keep ourselves safe, the same way as a family has 4 walls and locked doors because they keep them safe. That is priority number 1. Now, saying that, Jesus says, love your neighbors now. Okay, so that doesn't mean have your 4 walls and not get to know your neighbors, live as a recluse, never engage with them.
Never go outside.
Never go outside. Never wave at them, never be kind to them. Oh, no. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, now we're starting to get somewhere. So if your neighbor in your neighborhood say they were in a tough spot and they need some help, okay, how would you deal with that? How would you navigate that? Now, is it going to take some wisdom? More than likely, yes, the more complicated it becomes. And probably depending on how well you know them. But I think a Christian would end up saying, especially Jesus would say, I need to open up my compassion to them in some way. And that's probably getting to know them. And I think it starts with prayer for that person. I would say, have you started with getting to know people who have come from some of these countries and illegally or not? And how are you praying for them? I think that's your first step. I think everything that we talked about, if you're not starting with that as a Christian, knowing that they're your neighbors in the grand scheme of things, I mean, the teacher asked, who's my neighbor? And he wanted to get a little out with Jesus. And I mean, Jesus, everyone is. Yeah, Jesus like, okay, I see what you're doing. You want to find some little person that you can't. And I'm afraid that's kind of what I'm starting to see is we start to make some excuses with certain people, with certain things. And I have an issue with that. And it seems like Jesus does too.
What did he say? What was his response when he asked, "Who's my neighbor?" He said. What did he specific? I know he said pretty much everybody is. But
it was a parable of the Samaritan was his answer. That was his reply. He told the parable of the Samaritan to him, and said who was the neighbor.
You talking about the preacher,
it was the Levite. It was the priest.
The Levite, priest, and Samaritan. And the Samaritan
yeah.
helped. Okay, I remember that.
That was. He gave him a parable as a reply.
Yeah.
Of okay, you thought these people
were their neighbors,
but it was the guy that you didn't expect.
Yep.
And I'm afraid. I think Jesus. If Jesus was here, he would just give another parable that would have been like that. Except he would have changed, maybe say the Samaritan to a Hispanic worker on a construction site or something like that. And what are those cities called where the police aren't allowed to go in? Maybe he's even in that city to just make it even. Put the cherry on top with someone you wouldn't expect or something like that.
Yeah, and I know we're thinking, a lot about South America, Mexico, Central America. Also, Asia, Europe. We have people coming from everywhere. Most of the time, people are just thinking about, immigration coming from the South right now. But anybody who's coming in from another culture, we should welcome them. And if they're coming in, we haven't even we've touched on a lot of it illegally, but even the people who come over here legally have a tough time. If you think about it, I guarantee I've talked to people and
keep going. I like what you're about to say.
And I've talked to people who just they don't feel welcome sometimes, and that a lot of times it's in the South too. Some people don't feel welcome in the South, so they go somewhere else. People think the South is the Bible Belt. I think we need to start showing it a little more too. I know we can. I know a lot of people in the South who care about people, and I just think if we want to be representative of the Bible, we want to hold that Bible Belt title, then we need to not just beat people over the head with it, but we actually need to do what it says in here.
Right.
And I think people would recognize that, and maybe they feel more welcome.
You brought something to mind when you were talking about that. Just people, even if they're legally coming here and being welcome. I remember I was telling the youth it was a topic that was similar-ish to this. And I brought up to them my experience when I came from California to here. And I felt very, very unwelcomed when I was here by just the teenagers and even adults for a long time. And I remember crying to my mom of, I don't want to be here anymore, because I felt so like you shouldn't be here and so odd and weird, and they made sure you knew that, and no one would describe me as a shy person. And you know me. I think the last thing someone would say is Kyle's a shy guy. You'd be like, who are you probably talking about? It's kind of a weird thing. And I bring that up because my personality has always been the same, and just interacting with people and just being very friendly and getting to know them. And that's the way I was in California, and just friends with everyone. But when I came here, I actually became shy because I was pushed.
Did you have some nicknames? Did they give you some nicknames?
I would always been asked, why don't you talk? But every time I tried to talk, there was like a hushed silence of, oh, that weird kid.
Yeah.
And I had a heavy California slang when I came over here too. And just, again, no one wanted to get to know me. No one wanted to ask what it's like over there.
What grade did you move here?
Around just getting into middle school.
Okay.
So around in that area.
Tough time.
It was a little bit before that because we lived in Tennessee, but again, I was in the South. And we moved down here. And that was just the response. Is just anytime I brought up something about it, it was like, that's just what a weird kid. And then no one wanted to be friends with me. I mean, I didn't have friends for close to probably 4 or 5 years until finally someone gave me a chance. And I always remember that was a part of the reason. And so I've experienced that because California is a different culture. It's in the same country, but it's a different culture. You go there, it's a culture shock. And so I know how some people can feel, and I've talked with certain people. Venezuela and from Mexico are typically where I've experienced people from different countries, down south at least, of us. And there have been times where they felt very, very unwelcomed, and people said things about them being illegal, even though they weren't illegal. And I'm just thinking, if you're a Christian, why are you making assumptions then as a Christian and just labeling people? Again, you're making people ideas. And so I became an idea as a California. Mom and dad talk about those nasty liberals. And so here's this nasty liberal kid here. And I wouldn't describe my family as liberal politically
Just
ever.
where you came from.
Right. But that's how I was treated, though. I was treated as an idea, not as a person that's complex, and no one wanted to give me a chance by getting to know me. And I think that's a big issue if you're doing that as a Christian to people who are new here and you're treating them like that, unwelcoming. Like you talked about, just got done talking about Abraham and how he's welcoming them into, it's a tent, into his home. He doesn't know them. He's cooking them a meal. Knows nothing about them yet. I mean, and look how he's treating them. And like you talking about, he even bows down to them. He's washing their feet. Who else washed people's feet? Jesus. I wonder where that came from, that little story arc with Jesus when he washes the disciples' feet. Talks about Abraham's washing their feet. I would ask if someone on here, if you're a Christian, would you be willing to wash someone's feet who's an immigrant from another country? If not, then your pride may be a little too high. And then I would ask you to go back to, have you started with prayer for these people and getting to know them and being open to that? Now, none of that, what I just said, though, has nothing to do with whether or not we should protect ourselves as a country or anything like that. You need to start with yourself first, I think, as an individual. Are you taking progress to show compassion to other people, whether or not whatever they think? I mean, the Samaritans, they worshipped on another mountain, were half Jewish, half their enemies that kicked them out of that area. I mean, they're half of the people who would slaughter a city and then skin them alive. Okay, that's pretty bad, especially if that happened to your great grandma, and they did, you know. And you remember that story, and that's why grandma's not with you anymore.
That ain't very good.
You know what I mean? Just
grandma. I hope that don't happen to my grandma, man.
Yeah,
I'd be upset.
That's what I'm saying. You would probably hold a grudge, or I should say the temptation to hold a grudge and bitterness and anger would sit there. You know?
There'd be some anger there.
I definitely brought up the funniness with bringing up grandma.
Get my grandma alive.
Were you thinking of grandma baking some cookies when I said that, Zach?
I just know someone's got some problems if they skid my grandma alive. But while you're coughing, I also moved down here in 8th grade from Ohio, and it was tough for me too. So I just tried my hardest to fit in and. And I played basketball and stuff, so I made a few friends playing that. But it was tough for those first few months. Like, you're almost like a creature in a zoo. People would come up to you and be like, "Hey, what do you call this? And what do you call that? And what do you say for this?" And it was almost like you would just like figure out what like kind of a big joke. Until that one person gives you a chance. I had a couple friends in the neighborhood, and then a couple friends, playing basketball with and stuff that gave me a chance. And once you do that, usually people will start realizing, if you're a good person, then they'll start hanging with you and it goes from there. But I definitely know what that feels like. It ain't fun being that age, either middle school. So that's a tough time.
Yeah. And one thing I noticed too that was interesting was my first friends were outsiders themselves. They were the kids who, and by the way, I'm just saying it as a disclaimer. Typically, there were kids who watched anime and some stuff like that, and I watched some anime, so I'm not degrading anyone who watches anime. That's not what I'm saying.
Dragon Ball Z,
but Naruto was really huge. Yeah, and some kids like that. But you know what?
They like Dragon Ball Z.
You know what? I just missed it. I hate it.
You are a little younger. It did come.
I got a couple friends who are really into it, and they catched it. I just somehow I missed that win, man.
Good, man.
It's like you with Star Wars. We're about to get you click back in here.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll have a Dragon Ball night. I mean, hey,
dude, Dragon Ball Z. If you go from it would come on. I think on Cartoon Network. like from like 4 to 5 o'clock or 5 to 6 o'clock, I think.
Yeah.
And from the beginning to Dragon Ball Z GT,
Yeah.
that time period right until Majin Buu dies. It's good stuff. Right there.
You got some DVDs? We may bring it down, get a little Dragon Ball night or something like that.
I'll
be down with that.
I'm down for a little Star Wars night. We got to figure that out.
Yep, I like the sound of that. You need to get some of these references that me and Javen are doing. But but gosh, I hope someone gets that reference.
Yeah.
But I bring that up though they tended to be kids who we consider emo, into Naruto, or very, very nerdy kids. And they're the ones who reached out to me. And many of them were not Christians. I actually don't think any of them were Christians, and they're not. That's bad that's tarnishing Christians right there. Especially when we're talking about the Bible Belt. It was non-Christians who reached out to a foreigner first. There's a problem. I have always remembered that as an experience, that non-Christians were stepping up when Christians were not. Because I remember
a lot of times some non-Christians are better people in terms of just friendlier and more loving than some Christians.
I figure it's this, is what I'm thinking. They were already weird in comparison to other people, outsiders. And you already mentioned some other outsiders, tax collectors, prostitutes. Okay, we know how Jesus reacted to them. So here we go. Here's modern outcasts. And they reached out to me because the boundary of comfortability was probably closer. Now, that's not an excuse, though, however, because that's assuming as a Christian, we only show compassion to people when we're comfortable. Someone mentioned not too long ago, it was a podcast I was watching, it was by Jordan Peterson, and he describes, I think is fantastic the way he describes Abraham as he's reading through it. A master of the strange, and that is always that's stuck in my head. Abraham was a master of the strange, and he was not unwilling to show that compassion, that love, even though they were strange. He was probably I bet he was uncomfortable. I mean, they could have slaughtered them. There's no police force back then. There's no one going to protect him and his family. Yeah. These guys could have killed him. And let's just be honest,
taking all his money and
his wife. Bye. But that's not the reaction. There wasn't
no cop riding up on a camel, you know.
Yeah,
what you boys doing?
Yeah, there's no cops back then. Camel edition. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that would be interesting. I'd probably watch it, but anyways, I thought that was something that was interesting, and that's always stuck with me because that was before I was a Christian, and I've remembered it as a Christian as well. Am I a person who's willing to reach out and show compassion to someone? No one ever says you have to be friends with everyone. You show me in Scripture where it says you need to be friends and like everyone. Put that in the comments if you find it. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be. But from what I see is that we're supposed to be showing love to everyone, regardless if you like someone or not. I mean, it says that God loves his own enemies and sends the sunlight and the rain on them, regardless. That's the standard that we have. So there's enemies, and then weird and strange are kind of in there, way before the enemy. So God's sending sunlight and rain on people who are cursing him all the time and don't like him and blame him for all their problems. And there he is, just pouring out.
Some just deny him.
Love. Yeah, or denying him, right. And he still loves them. And so people who are weird and strange are kind of more in the middle. And this is what we're talking about right here. You may not know a lot about Hispanic culture or where they came from or what country it is or what experiences they've had. You may not understand Spanish, but does that, or maybe they're even illegal. Let's even say that. Okay. First of all, you're not law enforcement. Okay. Let's put that down. You're not with a gun with a sheriff badge.
You ain't a hall monitor saying respect my authority.
Yeah, exactly. You're not, what's that movie with,
Beverly Hills Cop? With Chris Farley.
I was thinking of Clint Eastwood. What's that movie he's in with the big 44 Colt? It's like make my
Josie
day.
Wales?
No, it's like Dirty something.
Oh, Dirty Harry?
Dirty Harry. Yeah, you're not Dirty Harry with your police 44 with the sheriff on there, and you're gonna go take care of everyone, and you're gonna be the law and lay it down. That's not under your belt, and our responsibility is to be showing love to those people who are outcasts. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Now, if we want to protect the country, you can vote in a certain way to protect the country.
Or enlist in the army.
Yep. Yeah, but you still have to
Or vote.
Yeah, or you can do your vote. Exactly. And you see there's a difference between your reactions on those things. And I kind of say it in that kind of way because it takes some wisdom, I think, even to engage in those things as well. But I think those are good principles of how we're supposed to treat people. But also, we want to take care of ourselves as a country to a certain extent. Now, some people would say no to that, and I would respectfully just disagree with that unless there was something else they could tell me about why having no borders and anyone could ever come here. I would like to hear maybe something besides that. I just don't think it's wise. If someone does, you can definitely let me know. I'm willing to listen to you at least. I mean, I don't know everything. I don't see the wisdom or the logic in that, because what's the point of letting anyone in here and then it becomes a place where no one wants to be anymore? That's just where it would lead to, because it becomes no different than anywhere else. So then why would anyone want to come in the future? That's if someone could solve that better than me, I'm willing to listen to them and figure that out. But again, I like the protection. I would protect my family one day. I would like my country to be protected to a certain extent. Now, we can talk about the details as well. We can get into the details. But again,
I think that wrapping up, I think the main thing is checking your heart first, like you said, before you even worry about the country or anything. Where's your heart at? Where's your mind at with these people? Is it just in a narrative? Is it just in a political figure, what his opinion is, but where's your heart at? And what should your opinion be based on this, God's word? And I think we've answered that. I think it's checking your pride and ego at the door, examining yourself, and having compassion, having love for other people like Jesus had, respecting them like Abraham and Lot respected the foreigners, not accepting the wrong that they've done or are doing, but having that compassion. And I think once step one is complete and you have that compassion, I think you'd be able to come to a better resolution than what's going on right now.
The only thing I'll leave people off with, and we don't have to really talk about it, but I just want people to realize that when Israel went into Egypt, they became foreigners. And when Egypt oppressed them later on, some people may think, oh, it's just evil Pharaoh, just completely just cold-hearted. There's nothing to his decision besides I just want to give it to them. In those days, when there's foreigners that populated huge within a country, they would sometimes overthrow those countries. And so that's what Pharaoh says. I'm afraid that they will take me out. And so that is a political decision that he made to oppress people. And I just want to leave that with people, that we do not need to make political decisions to oppress people. It have already happened in Scripture once with the family of Abraham, with Israel. So let's just make sure we don't do that again. Yeah, and that was in the name of defense. We just need to be careful with that, and use wisdom, and we need to be praying for people and to love them. So thank you for joining in with me and Zach on this discussion. We hope that as we kind of tried to take this discussion and type of just bounce it back and forth between us and kind of chew on it and think about it. I know I've learned a little bit more about this to be able to talk about it. I certainly don't know everything about it. It's honestly a complex discussion, especially politically, in defense and compassion. So, but this is us just trying to work it out. Me and Zach, we're putting our heads together. So hopefully you learned a little something like we did. And thank you for joining in, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank y'all.